As soon as the doorbell rang, I knew it was going to be one of those nights. You know the type. Where the wine flows a little too freely and the laughter gets a bit too loud. My husband, Dan, had invited his work buddies over for a casual dinner, and I, the ever-dutiful wife, had agreed to play hostess. I plastered on my best smile and opened the door, greeting everyone with a practiced cheeriness. The house quickly filled with the sounds of chattering voices and clinking glasses. I flitted around, topping off drinks and making sure everyone had enough to eat. It was all going smoothly until I caught Mark staring at me. Not just a casual glance, but a full-on, lingering gaze that made my skin crawl. What was his deal? Did I have something on my face? Great party, Jess, he said, flashing me a smile that was a little too wide. You look amazing tonight. Oh, great. Compliments from a guy who was practically undressing me with his eyes. Just what I needed. Thanks, Mark, I replied, trying to keep my tone light. Glad you're having fun. As the night wore on, Mark found every excuse to talk to me, each comment more suggestive than the last. I tried to laugh it off, but the whole situation was making me more and more uncomfortable. When we finally moved to the living room, I made sure to sit as far away from him as possible. Not that it mattered. He somehow ended up right next to me, his leg brushing against mine, accidentally, every few minutes. Dan, completely oblivious to the tension, got up to fetch more drinks, leaving me alone with Mark. Fantastic. This was exactly what I needed. Mark leaned in closer, his breath warm on my ear. You know, Jess, you're incredibly attractive. What was I supposed to say to that? Thanks? Get lost? Instead, I just laughed, a nervous sound that did nothing to mask my unease. You're drunk, Mark, I said, hoping he'd take the hint and back off. He didn't, but eventually, Dan came back, and the evening wound down. I breathed a sigh of relief when the last guest left, but the unease lingered. What had just happened? Did I imagine the whole thing? The next morning, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Curious, I opened it, only to see it was from Mark. Thanks for the wonderful evening. I really enjoyed our private moments. Private moments? Was he kidding? I deleted the message, hoping that would be the end of it. But of course, things like this never just go away, do they? No, they fester. They grow. And before you know it, you're caught in a web you didn't even realize was being spun around you. I had no idea what was coming next, but one thing was clear. Mark wasn't going to make it easy to forget that night. And maybe, just maybe, a part of me didn't want to forget. Not yet. If someone had told me a month ago that I'd be dodging suggestive texts from one of my husband's friends, I would have laughed in their face. But here I was, my phone buzzing yet again with a message from Mark. Morning, Jess. How's your day going? Casual enough, but I could read between the lines. I sighed, typing a quick response. Fine, thanks. Busy as usual. You? I kept it short, hoping he'd get the hint. Spoiler alert. He didn't. The texts kept coming, each one a bit more personal, a bit more flirty. It was like walking a tightrope, balancing between politeness and avoidance. Then came the group outing. Dan and his friends had planned a day at the park, and of course, Mark was there, sticking to me like glue. Every time I turned around, he was there, offering to help carry things, setting up the picnic, finding any excuse to touch my arm or shoulder. It was like he had some sort of radar, always knowing where I was. Here, let me help you with that, he said, grabbing a heavy cooler I was struggling with. Our hands brushed, and he gave me a look that made my stomach flip. Not in a good way. Thanks, Mark, I mumbled, trying to pull my hand away without making a scene. Why did he have to be so attentive? It didn't stop there. Mark started showing up at our house more frequently, always under the pretense of seeing Dan. But it was clear who he was really there for. Dan, being the ever-busy man that he was, often left us alone, giving Mark plenty of opportunities to chat me up. His texts became bolder, more frequent. You looked amazing today. Can't stop thinking about you. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't a little intrigued by the attention, but it was also unnerving. This wasn't some harmless flirtation, it was heading into dangerous territory. Then Dan dropped the bombshell. A weekend getaway with his friends. Including Mark. Great, just great. A whole weekend of trying to avoid his advances while pretending everything was normal. I felt a mix of excitement and dread. Part of me was curious about what would happen, but the other part knew this was playing with fire. The trip started off innocent enough. We all settled into the cabin, and I tried to keep my distance from Mark. But he was persistent, finding ways to isolate me from the group. One afternoon, he caught me on the porch, away from everyone else. "Jess, can we talk?" he asked, his tone serious. I nodded, wary but curious. We ended up in a deep conversation, his words blurring the lines of friendship. He talked about his admiration for me, how he felt a connection, and before I knew it, the sun had set, and we were still talking. It was unsettling how easy it was to get lost in his words. That evening, after a few drinks, things took a turn. Mark cornered me in a secluded spot outside the cabin. His touch lingered on my arm, his words dripping with seduction. "You know, Jess, I've been thinking about you a lot." "Mark, we can't do this," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But there was a part of me that was drawn to the danger, to the thrill of it all. I resisted, but the tension between us grew, wrapping around us like a tight coil. I managed to pull away that night, but the encounter left me shaken. This wasn't just a harmless flirtation anymore. Mark was determined, and I was caught in a game I wasn't sure I knew how to play. The line between right and wrong was blurring, and I had no idea where it would all lead. And so, the weekend continued, each moment with Mark a reminder that my life was teetering on the edge of something I couldn't quite control. The thrill, the fear, the curiosity, it was all too much. And yet, I couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. I never thought a simple text message could feel like a ticking time bomb. But there it was, lighting up my phone screen with Mark's name, his words growing more explicit by the day. Back from the trip, the messages were relentless, each one nudging me further into a corner between curiosity and guilt. How did I end up here? Oh right, I let it happen. Smooth move, Jess. Dan, ever the workaholic, announced he had a business trip coming up. A whole week alone, just what I needed. More time to ruminate on Mark and his persistent advances. It didn't take long for him to pounce on the opportunity. "I'll come over, keep you company," he suggested, like he was doing me a favor. Sure, because nothing says good company like a walking temptation. Trying to be the rational adult, I suggested we meet at a nearby cafe. Public place, neutral territory, no room for funny business. Yeah, right. The minute we sat down, the conversation took a nosedive into flirtation territory. His eyes, his smile, he had a way of making everything sound like a secret. And just like that, my resolve started to crumble. "Come over to my place. Just to talk," he said, with a smile that promised anything but talking. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Because apparently, I had the self-control of a toddler in a candy store. His apartment was cozy, inviting, and dangerously intimate. Before I knew it, we were on the couch, and then his lips were on mine. It was like a dam breaking. All the tension, the forbidden thrill, it all came rushing out. For a moment, nothing else mattered. But then reality slapped me in the face. "Mark, we can't," I said, pushing him away. My heart was racing, but my mind was screaming at me to get out. I left in a hurry, my emotions a tangled mess of guilt and confusion. What had I done? I swore to myself it wouldn't happen again. Famous last words. Mark's messages didn't stop. If anything, they became more insistent, more tempting. "I'm sorry. I respect your boundaries," he'd say, right before throwing in something that would make me question everything. It was a twisted game, and I was losing. Finally, I decided to meet him one last time, to put an end to this madness. We met at a secluded park, a place where we could talk without prying eyes. Or so I thought. The conversation quickly turned heated, emotions running high. And just like before, the pull was too strong. We ended up in each other's arms, kissing passionately, lost in the moment. As we pulled away, breathless and flushed, I knew the situation was spiraling out of control. What was supposed to be a final goodbye turned into another forbidden embrace. My life was teetering on the edge of chaos, and I had no idea how to stop it. I walked away from the park, my thoughts a whirlwind of regret and longing. This wasn't just a harmless flirtation anymore. It was a full-blown affair, and I was right in the middle of it. The thrill, the danger, it was intoxicating. But at what cost? As I headed home, I couldn't shake the feeling that my world was about to implode, and there was no going back. There's nothing quite like the chaos of balancing a double life to make you appreciate the simplicity of a boring one. Dan returned from his business trip, none the wiser about the storm brewing just beneath the surface. Our household hummed along like normal, but underneath, my interactions with Mark had turned into a dangerous game of secrecy and desire. Each glance, each touch, a tantalizing risk. Mark and I began meeting in secret, sneaking moments during the day to steal kisses and touch. The thrill was intoxicating. It felt like we were teenagers again, living for the adrenaline rush of getting away with something forbidden. We'd meet in obscure locations, places where no one would recognize us. We even started using coded language in our texts, turning our deceit into a twisted game of espionage. One evening, at a friend's birthday party, Mark found a way to slip away with me to a quiet room. The party continued blissfully unaware downstairs while we were upstairs, hearts racing at the risk of being caught. The intensity of our encounters was magnified by the danger, making it harder to pull away each time. But the guilt was a heavy, unwelcome guest. Every lie I told Dan felt like a stab to my conscience, yet I couldn't stop. He remained trusting and unaware, making the duality of my life all the more unbearable. Juggling my home life with the affair started to take its toll. I could see the worry in Dan's eyes as he noticed the changes in my health and demeanor, but I couldn't confide in him. The stress was eating me alive, but I was trapped in a web of my own making. Mark's demands for more time together grew. He wanted more than stolen moments, he wanted us to be together, properly. But how could I possibly balance it all? The pressure was immense, and it was starting to crack my composure. Then came a weekend when Dan was away again. Mark took the opportunity to spend the entire time at our house. It was exhilarating and terrifying. We lived out our fantasies, playing house in the most twisted sense. The thrill of being with him in my own home, in my own bed, was a rush like no other. But every creak of the floor, every passing car outside, made my heart leap with fear. Living this double life was exhilarating, but it was also exhausting. I knew it couldn't last. The secrecy, the lies, the constant balancing act, it was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. But for now, I was caught in the whirlwind, unable to break free, and not entirely sure I wanted to. There's a special kind of thrill in knowing you're dancing on the edge of disaster. It was a regular Tuesday when Mark decided to up the ante. "I want you to meet someone," he said, his voice low and conspiratorial. "Enter Kevin." Mark's friend who, to my dismay, was fully aware of our affair. His presence added a new layer of danger and excitement to our meetings. Great, just what I needed. Another player in this game of deceit. Kevin quickly became a fixture in our secret rendezvous. His suggestive comments and blatant flirting only served to heighten the tension. I found myself caught in a bizarre love triangle, with each encounter more charged than the last. The dynamic had shifted, and I was at the center of it, being pulled in different directions by two men who were both thrilling and terrifying in equal measure. Then came their audacious proposal. A weekend away, just the three of us. I knew it was insane, that it could only end badly, but the allure of the forbidden was too strong. Against my better judgment, I agreed. What could go wrong, right? Spoiler alert. Everything. The trip was a whirlwind of passion and risk. Kevin's involvement added a new dimension to the affair, making it even harder to resist. The three of us indulged in a fantasy world, far removed from the realities waiting for me back home. It was intoxicating, but also deeply unsettling. Each moment was tinged with the fear of discovery, but that fear only made the experience more exhilarating. Back home, the lines between reality and fantasy began to blur. My interactions with Mark and Kevin became more frequent and intense, creating a web of lies that was growing increasingly hard to manage. I was living two lives, and the pressure was mounting. Then the anonymous messages started. At first, they were vague, just hints that someone knew about the affair. But as they continued, the messages became more specific, more threatening. The fear of exposure added to the thrill but also ramped up my anxiety to unbearable levels. Who could know? And what did they want? Dan began to notice changes in my behavior. He grew suspicious, though he hadn't yet confronted me. I could see the worry in his eyes, feel the tension in our home. The facade I had so carefully maintained was beginning to crack. Each day was a delicate balancing act, trying to keep my secret life hidden while pretending everything was normal. The pressure was immense, and I was slowly unraveling. The thrill of the affair was starting to feel like a noose tightening around my neck. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart skipped a beat. Was it another message from the anonymous sender? Or worse, had Dan finally found out? One evening, as I sat alone in the living room, my phone buzzed again. I picked it up with shaking hands. Another message. I know what you've been doing. It won't be long now. The fear was suffocating. I was trapped, with no clear way out. I looked at Dan, sitting across the room, his brow furrowed in concern. He knew something was wrong, but he couldn't yet see the full extent of the betrayal. How much longer could I keep this up? How much longer before everything came crashing down? The thrill, the danger, the deceit, it was all spiraling out of control. And for the first time, I truly felt the weight of my choices. This wasn't just a game anymore. It was real, and it was threatening to destroy everything I held dear. As the night wore on, I realized I was standing on the precipice, and there was no going back. There's nothing quite like the feeling of your phone buzzing with a message that could ruin your life. One morning, while sipping my coffee, my phone pinged with an anonymous text. I know about you and Mark. Pay up, or everyone else will know too. Panic hit me like a freight train. Just what I needed, blackmail. Mark and Kevin were quick to reassure me. Don't worry, they said. We just continue as planned and don't give in to the demands. Easy for them to say. They weren't the ones with everything to lose. Their confidence was both comforting and deeply troubling. Was this all just a game to them? At home, things were tense. Dan, my ever-observant husband, confronted me about my distant behavior and frequent absences. Is everything okay, Jess? You've been acting strange lately. His concern was genuine, and it cut through me like a knife. I'm fine, just stressed with work, I lied, managing to deflect his concerns, but the strain on our marriage was becoming painfully evident. The anonymous messages didn't stop. If anything, they escalated, now demanding money in exchange for silence. The stress was unbearable. Desperate, I even considered ending the affair to protect my marriage, but the thought of losing the thrill and excitement was paralyzing. I was stuck between two worlds, and it felt like both were closing in on me. Mark, ever the problem solver, came up with a plan to catch the blackmailer. We'll stage a meeting, set up hidden cameras, and catch them red-handed, he said. The complexity of the plan heightened the stakes, but what choice did I have? We were in too deep to turn back now. The day of the staged meeting arrived, and my nerves were shot. Everything was set. The cameras, the location, even the bait. But, of course, nothing goes as planned. The blackmailer showed up, and to my utter horror, it was someone from our social circle. The confrontation was explosive, emotions running high. The sense of betrayal was overwhelming. The exposure of the blackmailer created a massive rift within our group of friends. Trust eroded, accusations flew, and relationships were shattered. It was chaos. And in the midst of it all, my affair with Mark and Kevin was teetering on the brink of discovery. Every whispered conversation, every suspicious glance felt like it could be the end. Back home, the tension was palpable. Dan was more suspicious than ever, and I was running out of excuses. The double life I had been leading was unraveling at an alarming rate, and there was no way to stop it. The thrill and danger that had once been so intoxicating were now suffocating me. My entire world was on the verge of collapse, and I was powerless to do anything about it. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, the weight of my choices pressed down on me. The lies, the deceit, the betrayal, it was all coming to a head. And I had no idea how to pick up the pieces. The game was over, and I had lost. Now, I just had to face the consequences. There's a special kind of hell reserved for those moments when you realize everything is about to come crashing down. The tension at home had reached a fever pitch. Dan was no fool, and his suspicion had turned into a tangible force, hanging in the air like a storm cloud. One evening, he dropped a bombshell that left me reeling. I hired a private investigator, Jess. I know something's going on. Oh, fantastic. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse. The private investigator, a diligent bloodhound, had gathered enough evidence to bury me. Pictures, texts, dates, all compiled into a neat little report that confirmed Dan's worst suspicions. There was no wriggling out of this one. My double life was laid bare. Dan confronted me with the evidence, his eyes burning with anger and betrayal. How could you, Jess? How could you do this to us? His voice trembled, a mix of fury and heartbreak. My attempts at deflection crumbled under the weight of his accusations. I was left with no choice but to confess. The argument that followed was explosive, raw, and brutal. Words were said that could never be taken back. As if things couldn't get worse, Mark and Kevin's involvement in the affair became public knowledge. Our once close-knit social circle and workplace were rocked by the scandal. It was like a bomb had gone off, and the shockwaves were felt by everyone. The whispers, the pointed looks, the blatant gossip, it was relentless. Dan wasted no time filing for divorce, citing infidelity. The legal battle that ensued was bitter and vicious, each side airing grievances and accusations. What had once been a stable, if mundane, life was now a battlefield. I lost many friends in the fallout. People I had considered close turned their backs on me, choosing sides in a war that had no winners. The public shame was suffocating. Mark and Kevin, though implicated, managed to continue their lives with minimal fallout compared to mine. Typical. The men get to walk away while the woman bears the brunt of the blame. Alone and ostracized, I was left to pick up the pieces of my shattered life. Nights were the worst, filled with endless loops of regret and self-recrimination. How had I let it come to this? The choices I had made, the lies I had told, it all seemed so pointless now. Reflecting on the choices that led to my downfall was a bitter pill to swallow. The thrill, the excitement, the danger, it had all come at too high a price. The consequences were severe, and there was no easy way out. So, here I am, trying to rebuild my life from scratch. No friends, no family, just the cold reality of my new existence. It's a lonely road, but it's the one I have to walk. Each step forward is a reminder of the past, but also a promise to myself to be better, to do better. The game was over, and I had lost. Now, it was time to start again, wiser and, hopefully, stronger. If you think hitting rock bottom is bad, wait until you start digging yourself out. The divorce proceedings dragged on like a never-ending nightmare. Dan was out for blood, seeking full custody of our children, and the fight had morphed into a war of vengeance rather than justice. Each court appearance felt like another nail in the coffin of our past life. Mark and Kevin, my partners in crime, began distancing themselves from me as the reality of the scandal hit home. Their initial support evaporated, leaving me to face the fallout alone. It was ironic. Once, I couldn't get them to leave me alone, and now, they vanished when I needed them most. Classic. I moved into a small apartment, trying to piece together some semblance of normalcy. The isolation was brutal. Regret hung over me like a dark cloud, and every night was a battle against the crushing loneliness. This was my new reality, a stark contrast to the thrilling chaos I had been living. To cope with the fallout, I started attending therapy. Sitting on that couch, baring my soul to a stranger, seeking to understand my actions and find a way forward, it was humbling. Therapy was a lifeline, helping me navigate the emotional wreckage and start the long process of healing. Each session was a step toward reclaiming myself. Meanwhile, Dan began a new relationship. Seeing him happy, moving on, was like a punch to the gut. His newfound happiness only highlighted my loneliness. The contrast was painful, a constant reminder of what I had lost and the consequences of my choices. Amidst the chaos, a glimmer of hope appeared. A job offer in a different city. It was a chance to start fresh, away from the scandal and the whispers that followed me everywhere. The decision was tough. Leaving behind the remnants of my old life was scary, but staying was unbearable. I needed a new beginning, a clean slate. I packed my bags and moved to the new city, determined to rebuild my life and career. The experience left me wary, but also wiser. The mistakes I made were scars that would never fully heal, but they were also lessons etched into my soul. Starting over was daunting, but it was also liberating. In the new city, I focused on my work, throwing myself into it with a determination I hadn't felt in years. Each day was a struggle, but it was also a chance to prove to myself that I could rise from the ashes. I was rebuilding, piece by piece, and while the journey was long, it was mine to walk. Reflecting on my past, I realized the importance of integrity, the value of trust, and the cost of betrayal. My life had been shattered, but I was picking up the pieces, creating something new and, hopefully, better. The path ahead was uncertain, but I was moving forward, one step at a time. Moving to a new city was like stepping into a different world, a world where my past wasn't etched on every street corner. As I immersed myself in work, I made a conscious effort to avoid the pitfalls of my past. The fresh start was both liberating and daunting, but it felt like a necessary escape. My new job consumed most of my time, providing a much-needed distraction from the chaos I left behind. Surprisingly, making new friends was easier than I expected. These people knew nothing about my scandalous history, allowing me to redefine myself without the shadow of my previous actions. It was refreshing to be seen for who I was now, not who I had been. Yet, every so often, a nagging fear would creep in. What if they found out? One sunny afternoon, while grabbing coffee at a local cafe, I had a chance encounter with an old acquaintance from my hometown. My heart skipped a beat as memories of the scandal flooded back, but I managed to keep my composure. We exchanged pleasantries, and I carefully navigated the conversation, ensuring it didn't drift into dangerous territory. It was a stark reminder that the past could rear its ugly head at any moment. Feeling more stable, I decided to dip my toes into the dating pool again. I approached new relationships cautiously, carrying the lessons from my past like a shield. Each date was a mix of excitement and anxiety, but I was determined to move forward. I was no longer the naive woman who got swept up in an affair. I was stronger, more aware of my boundaries. One evening, out of the blue, Dan reached out. His voice on the other end of the line was a jarring reminder of the life I had left behind. He sought closure and offered a tentative truce. The conversation was tense, filled with unspoken words and lingering hurt. But as we talked, I felt a weight lift. It wasn't a perfect resolution, but it was a step towards healing. Reconnecting with my children was the hardest part. They visited me in my new city, and while our relationship was strained, it was slowly improving. We were working through the past, one awkward conversation at a time. Each visit brought a mix of joy and sorrow, but I was grateful for the chance to rebuild those bonds. Over time, I found a sense of peace and acceptance. I realized that while my actions were wrong, they didn't define my future. The journey to forgiveness, both of myself and from others, was long and winding, but I was on the right path. I was learning to live with my mistakes, not in spite of them. As the months passed, I embraced my new life with a cautious optimism. I was no longer running from my past, but rather, using it as a guide for a better future. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful. This was my chance to start anew, and I wasn't going to waste it. If you had told me a year ago that I'd be thriving in a new city, I would have laughed in your face. But here I was, my career flourishing beyond my wildest dreams. The respect and recognition I gained at work boosted my confidence in a way I hadn't felt in years. It was amazing what a fresh start could do. My professional success was a beacon of light in what had been a very dark time. Feeling the need to give back, I joined a local community group. Volunteering and making positive contributions helped me find a sense of purpose. There was something incredibly healing about helping others, and it allowed me to start rebuilding my sense of self. Plus, it kept me busy and focused on something other than my past mistakes. One day, on a whim, I started writing a blog. Sharing my experiences and the lessons I learned from the affair became a therapeutic outlet. The process of writing helped me make sense of everything I had been through. It was raw and honest, and the feedback I received from readers who resonated with my story was incredibly rewarding. My relationship with my children continued to improve. Their visits became more frequent, and our conversations more open. Slowly but surely, we were rebuilding the bond that had been fractured. Every visit was a reminder of what truly mattered, and it fueled my determination to be a better person for them. And then there was Alex. We met at a community event, and from the moment we started talking, there was an easy connection. He was kind, understanding, and most importantly, he knew about my past. Instead of judging me, he saw the person I was striving to become. It was refreshing and a little terrifying to be with someone who saw through the layers of my past mistakes. As our relationship grew, it became a stark contrast to the deceit and secrecy of my affair with Mark and Kevin. Alex and I built a foundation of trust and honesty, something I had come to value deeply. Being with him felt like a new chapter, a chance to do things right. Looking back on everything, I realized that the affair, as painful and destructive as it had been, was also transformative. It taught me resilience, self-awareness, and the value of integrity. I had been through the fire and emerged stronger, with a clearer understanding of who I was and what I wanted from life. Moving forward, I felt a sense of hope and determination. The journey hadn't been easy, but it was mine. I was ready to embrace whatever the future held, armed with the lessons of my past and a newfound strength. This was my story, and I was ready to write the next chapter with hope and conviction.